I do want to ask you if you have any questions again. Please do put them in the Q&A section straight away. And also at the end of the session, I'm going to leave 5 minutes because there's an evaluation on our talks today and our discussion. So please do take part in the evaluation. It's very important for the program. So let me share my screen. Right, 1 minute, please. Okay. Just adjusting to the full screen. If you can give me a second, please. Okay. So in this one, we're going to be speaking a little bit further. Now that we've had the discussion on sustainable development, we're going to be speaking about the Sustainable Development Goals and looking more in depth at the goals. I have to go through quite quickly. So the start of it were the Millennium Development Goals when we were turning into the year 2000, and the United Nations set 8 goals that were incredibly ambitious. The evolution of these goals was that none of them were met because they were incredibly ambitious, and they were not specific to particular countries and what they need. There was no fourth dimension that we spoke about in the previous lecture. So eventually they became more and more sophisticated into the SDGs, which were adopted and agreed upon by most of the member countries of the UN. And they're very, very difficult to contest, the SDGs, because they are generally for the greater good. So there are 17 goals. Within each goal, there are targets, and then they've also set out the indicators so that at least there's a common way of assessing and reaching key performance indicators throughout the countries. And the Sustainable Development Goals have been absorbed in various different ways by countries in order to allow different countries to first assess which of the goals they need to address first. Obviously, in developed countries, a lot of the environmental, economic, and social goals are being targeted at the same time. In countries that are developing, usually goals that are to do with the economy and the infrastructure tend to be the one addressed the most because they can be funded and designed at a much faster and less complex pace. So if you were to bundle and look at the clustering of the SDGs, they are absorbed and adopted by governments, technical community, civil society, and businesses as well. So everyone is speaking the SDG languages. They look at governance, economy, cultural aspects. Culture has become very important in the SDGs. And they look at the application of all of this. Not also that, it's how the Sustainable Development Goals interact with one another. And they've bundled them. They've created bundles whereby the economic goals are very, is to create equal job opportunities, create decent jobs by growing the economy, produce, consume in a responsible way. So these are fairly straightforward. The environmental one, which they call also the biosphere, are about water, preservation of water, treatment, sanitation. They're all to do with the biosphere, climate change, life below the sea, and also life on land. So forests and marine diversity and preservation. And then there are the societal ones, which are your healthcare and your education and your gender equality. Most countries want to have zero hunger, eradicate poverty, create sustainable communities, and create frameworks that that can allow people to prosper. So the bundling of these tends to either work in different ways. There are some entities that work specifically on the economy, for instance, and so they focus on these SDGs and creating partners in them. Some would look into a lot more, and some leaders have adopted a way of moving in and out and creating trickle down effects between the SDGs. If you remember in the previous talk, we were talking about impact. And I want to show the exact same slide, but I want to superimpose the SDGs as well on the environmental, economic, and social impact. So you're not just approaching it with sustainability management, but you're also looking at how these SDGs can be divided. Your ultimate goal is to work it within layers. So, for instance, it's very important. We have a good example in a national initiative in Egypt called Haya Karima, which is to upgrade and invest, lifting the quality of life and the livelihoods of 55 million rural Egyptians living in the poorest communities. So you know that the first thing you have to do is target that first layer, which is obvious, is target the infrastructure that hinders the economy. You know, you create the roads, you line the canals, you create connectivity for systems, provide water and sanitation, provide energy when needed, diversify the energy. So that's the first layer where the work is pretty much cut out for you. You know exactly what's missing. Then you have the other layer, which is to protect communities, protect their livestock, their livelihoods, their crops, create solutions for intelligent agriculture, really look at how these communities gain their incomes, get people into education, have the provision of healthcare. That's another layer. And then the third layer, which you would want to approach, is enhancing the quality of people's ability to dream and feel safe, and for young girls to join the workforce, to give people the skills in order for them to grow their businesses, to feel that they can grow economically and raise their incomes without moving into the city. And all of this is a very, very important way of approaching the project so that it's not rushed, it's studied on all sorts of impacts. Large scale projects, mega projects at least, they need you to have this kind of pacing of management, this project planning that can see all the different layers. Again, at the heart of the SDGs, it's really about people. It's about us. It's about happiness, feeling represented, you know, in a world where there is hate speech and cyberbullying and loss of privacy. You also need to consider mental health. These are not new or Western ways of looking at things. These have really existed, but because the challenges that we have in Africa are so physical, are very much tied with our infrastructure and the built environment. Sometimes we have lost touch with the real winning aspect of investment in futures, and it comes back to us and our children. I came across this in the United Nations program, and I found it very interesting. And I'm going to leave the slides for you to share. But it's a wonderful way of engaging communities. So each goal, you know, before we had the goals with the colors and then they have the targets. But this year, they've been represented in a very interesting way, where it's telling you at the bottom of each goal. So for no poverty, it tells you donate what you don't use. The second one, waste less food and support your local farmers. It's vaccinate your family. You know, it's telling individuals how to start with lifestyle changes that can actually grow towards the community, grow towards the country, the region, the global, but it starts with the individual action. So in an interesting twist, the SDGs are becoming more accessible to us in our behavior as individuals. And so I really enjoyed going through this. And I urge you all to look at the SDG report 2020. And it just gives you ideas, avoid wasting water, empower local girls and to ensure their rights, educate someone in your community, etc. So I shared the 17 goals and the way that they are portrayed, that they are accessible. I mean, government, donors, large scale agencies have these projects, but they will approach them at a completely different scales. The interesting thing about the SDGs is that they are very scalable. I mean, you can really use them in all sorts of ways. You can start with a local project all the way up to an entity. We do that in my business as an SDG Vital Voices ambassador. My company does this. We have SDGs built into the way our company values, been built into the services that we offer. And so you're finding more and more businesses and young people engaging in the adoption of SDGs and how they do business and how they apply policy as well. So these are really interesting ways of engaging civil society. Importantly as well, I want to go through the interlinkages. This is just one example. We don't need to go through them all, but we need to look at the SDGs as the Sustainable Development Goals don't operate in silos. I mean, and that's where the planning and the leadership for them has to come in. So for instance, if I want to target a rural community and say, I wish that this rural community can grow, how can I help you? When I engage with the local community, there's a point where it does not matter skill or investment because something critical is missing. So without clean water and without energy, progress does not happen. So when I invest in prioritizing the right needed aspect to kickstart development, it's incredibly valuable. So when there's a community that enables itself to have energy, then you can start, looking at creating more jobs, looking at better health, getting the kids into school, creating jobs, having better clean drinking water facilities on board, better irrigation. And so the trickle down effect and the multilateral effect between the SDGs is incredibly important to know. There's no need to target all the 17 at the same time. Some, when targeted, attribute to the integration of another and another and another, so that the investment in one SDG, how you argue which one is more important. I mean, arguably, in order to create zero hunger, someone might just say, right, so let's go planting trees. But I can't do that if I don't have access to water, if I cannot desalinate the water, if I cannot pump the water in order to plant these trees. And when I do plant trees, I'm creating jobs. And when I'm creating jobs, I'm reducing inequalities. And therefore, the cause and the effect and the enablement of one SDG to be utilized as efficiently as possible is exactly what we in Africa need to be thinking. It's not just a checklist, it's more than that. And we need to argue for the importance of this, just exactly like politicians argue their policies or board members argue the direction of a business or sales strategies. When you're arguing for the SDGs, you need to know how to maximize the benefit with the same amount of resources. The Africa as dashboard, SDG dashboard, is produced every year. And it basically looks at how Africa is faring in the SDGs. And they create these very busy charts. But I don't want you to focus on the busy charts. I'm very interested in showing how Africa is faring with the SDGs. So the majority of people assume that Africa is a continent. The diversity within Africa, the GDP, the economic abilities, the education systems, entrepreneurship, military power, conflicts. It is such a diverse continent that you cannot put one, you can't bundle them up. You have to split them up and understand. And it's a wonderful opportunity now that not only African countries are engaging and exchanging culture like we're doing now, it's it shows you the opportunities of learning from lessons from your neighbors, as opposed to adopting climate change policy from Norway. I don't know how useful that would be in Egypt. It's important to see the similarities within the diversity and to be transparent and exchange in the experiences of what went wrong here, what went right here, and really lift the continent up using peer consultancy, using similarities, using empathy again. So this chart is very complicated. I always get lost, but I try to summarize it for you. And surprisingly enough, these are the SDGs that Africa is doing well in. You'd be very surprised because everyone thinks it's, it's the straightforward ones, the predictable ones. Everyone thinks it's, probably hunger and poverty, gender equality. No, speaking on gender equality, this is the most underperforming SDG all over the world. We are still not getting women to be where they are. We're still not utilizing half the population. We're still not encouraging girls to get into. So the entire globe, as sophisticated as we are in different countries, is underperforming in SDG for gender equality. However, in reduced inequalities, Africa is doing better, which is reduced inequalities between gender, between age, between income groups, between geographic location, and between also knowledge and skills. Africa is actually doing very well when it comes to life on land, climate change, and life below water. And the reason being is that the SDGs in recent years have been localized and internalized in African countries. So Morocco has been able to really register its needs. South Africa has looked at its problem with the water crisis issue that it had and really looked at what do I need. You have different countries, Sudan and the transition. Again, you have countries like Ethiopia and its need to generate electricity. There's so many different countries that have looked at how the SDGs impact their own particular needs and which ones. And because we live in a zone that requires us to have food security, we need to look at our life on land. We need to look at the condition of our soil. We need to look at the condition of our diversity. We rely a lot on our marine for transport. We rely a lot on our fisheries. We rely a lot on this. So we are doing a lot better with our water resources. There's investment in cleaning up canals, investment in looking at your streams, cleaning up the oceans, desalinating water. In a way, you're looking at life below water. A lot of the African countries rely on tourism as well. You're looking at climate change because you live in arid, harsh conditions where we are prone to drought, we are prone to flash flooding in certain areas, and we need to utilize, like, in Burkina Faso, they have a way of irrigating the land by channeling the flood water. This is a kind of homegrown, localized technology that most countries in Africa are looking towards to borrow as peer knowledge. In Egypt, we have waste management, which there's a lot of investment being pumped in. We have the entrepreneurs in recycling and upcycling and reuse. This culture is being invested in and really, really supported now in Egypt's policy, because there is an absolute need to do something about waste management, responsible consumption and production. A lot of the building materials that are generated in Africa: cement, steel, minerals. These large companies are falling under a lot of pressure to change the way they produce what they produce in a more environmentally climate responsive way, and so on. Reduced inequalities, you're getting more women into the workforce, you're seeing less girls leave school, you're seeing laws and regulations against forced early marriages, FGM. So there is a lot of layer work working into this. Infrastructure and roads and buildings. Why are we doing this? We are doing this for two reasons. Because waiting for these adopted Western ideas to come sort of, and parachute down on us and work hasn't. So we've embraced localization. We've embraced ideas coming from young people. And second of all, we understand that investment in Africa requires that you lay out your success stories. So if you want partnerships and investors, you have to show a shared commitment and you have to speak the same language as this partner. And what else could be a better language than using the Sustainable Development Goals, because it's very global and everyone understands it. So here's how COVID has affected each of the SDGs. Obviously, there are some Sustainable Development Goals that did a lot better, but it's cause and effect. So all of the industrial and economic goals, their indicators have seen a negative and sharp decline all over the world, actually. But in things like, reduced fishing, reduced pressure on the environment, reduced greenhouse gas emissions, reduced pollution, that is, you see, the plus side, the automatic pendulum that happens when you reduce economic activity. Suddenly the environment gets to benefit, but then you get unsustainable jobs. So it's just a physical manifestation of the idea of sustainability, of how difficult it is to try that balance. You want to increase economic activity again, build back better, recover better. You want to increase these jobs, get people back into the workforce slowly, add more jobs, but you really don't want to end up causing economic disaster that is caused by direct environmental degradation. That also has its effects, migration, loss of jobs, loss of livelihoods, more import for basic foods, etc. That kind of balance we need to be very aware of it, because it also has to be said that in governance, it's very difficult to understand these forces that push and pull if you don't understand how these systems work together, if you don't see that balance is always in a state of movement, economic, social. Is it bearable? How difficult is it on people's health? Then you need investment here, then suddenly you need investment there. It's a continuing process of not trial and error, but it's just forces that pull among each other. The main problems in Africa, like we said before, are for the SDGs to be implemented is that you have unforeseen externalities where foresight was not integrated. The global pandemic, COVID, was one of them. The next one is going to be climate change. We have data gaps. Thank God we don't have data gaps for climate change. They're right there. So let's embrace them in our governments. Let's embrace them in our businesses and really use them in order to avoid complete disaster. We need evidence-based planning. So when you have the science in front of you, you have the demographics, you have civil society telling you this is the cause of drought, or this is the cause of lack of food, or this is the cause of marginalization of older people or younger people from the workforce, there is an effect. How does this resonate in our incomes, etc., and how does it resonate in government? The SDGs remain isolated from the fluid geopolitics of the region. We have to understand that we as a continent operate and interact together, the more we increase the interaction between African countries together, the more we create resilience, the more we create shared values, the more we create proper, real sophisticated foreign policies towards each other built on knowing the needs, opening up opportunities. Africa, 3 billion people, huge $3 trillion market opportunities, resource rich and young. So you have everything there for you. The only risk that you have is climate change, and that we have to collectively work against the depletion of the resources. For water scarcity, that's another risk. We have to work collectively towards bilateral solutions, proper diplomacy, real cross-boundary regulation and agreements, binding agreements, guidelines, all of this in order to preserve the continent and all of us to benefit. And look at the synergies that have been underexplored for many, many years. And these are the principles that, again, it's a sustainable development is a form of management. Look at externalities, make it about people and holistic. SDGs are a communication tool for all of us to the entire world. Let's use it. We don't have to create only nationalistic kind of communication strategies. We can use this global tool. Data is very critical. M&Es should be sectoral. It's not one size fit all. And also inequalities is the key to understanding the proper weaknesses in society. So you will know when these inequalities are being reduced effectively, that you are actually reaching a point where you are addressing the weaknesses. Thank you very, very much. I've kept it brief. I do want to see the Q&A very quickly, followed by the assessment, which I will leave 5 minutes for. So Amanda has asked, you have talked about women failing to be on the peak in terms of empowerment. What do you think could be the cause? Is it on the side of us or other factors? Okay, that's one. And Amanda, how best can we deal with issues of mental health? Because I have learned with concern that in Africa, mental health is really not important. And this is why we have so many issues of suicide, parent killings, their children, etc. Okay. So the first one is that we need to create the proper ecosystems for women to be able to enter the workforce when they want to enter the workforce. The problem is that the entire world is looking for creativity and entrepreneurship. And usually women, when they are at their most ambitious, energetic time, they are not able to dedicate all of this time. There's family, there's children, there's all of that going on. And so the steps that women take to enter the workforce or become entrepreneurs is always later than that of men. And so because of just how this, the family is run, etc., where the woman has the majority of the responsibility, their capacity to join the workforce and actually stay there and grow their companies has been shortened dramatically from their education to the idea of the entrepreneurship, kind of getting the funding, starting the business, seeing the business, and then they have to be a caregiver on the other end for parent, etc. So it's very complex to ask women to do everything if they're not on the same level playing field for time, for opportunity, for funding, and for the constraints that they have. So is it because it's our fault? I don't think I like to blame everything on men, but I think that women in power, women who are privileged to be successful, it is part and parcel, it is their duty to be the voice where they are for other women. This is number one. And number two, women should not expect assistance because they are women, and they should not expect men to empower them. They need to be able to demand what they need in order for them to succeed. So if you want to invest in skills for a woman, don't just tell her, please come, there's an awareness program or a tutorial or a mentorship. You have the woman should be asking, is there a space for my children to be? Is there caregiving? Are there nurseries for my children to be, so that I can go and focus on my education? Can I shift the way I work? So women need to demand more, in order to give themselves the correct space and time to do well. Um, Mental instability is actually becoming a conversation all over the world, simply because it's been, um, it's been really, really put to the forefront because of the COVID issue. So you have issues of suicide rates growing among young women in Japan, in parts of Europe, in Africa, etc. Mental health is being addressed as something that needs to be identified early on, because when it gets to that stage where people are not able to take a breather, um, it's very late. So I think for part of women's health is not just reproductive health and and getting the mammograms and all of that. There needs to be a space for psychiatric assistance, in schools, and identifying forms of abuse, forms of exhaustion, and mental health. This should be part and parcel with women's health, and it should be integrated in education systems. Um, Linda, yes, the slides for the presentations will be shared. And what platforms do we within the continent for peer learning, joint planning, and strategizing can regional and local levels to optimize utilization of limited resources for implementation and efforts towards achieving the SDGs? I think I understand what you mean. I think you understand is, in order to utilize the SDGs, who needs to be working together? Um, Possibly, I think reporting on your progress and making this public information, on the one hand, from government. The other hand is to also be able to communicate at the local level, at the provincial, the centers, the villages, to be able to understand the need. Because if you leave the SDGs just to government and just to those with a voice, local politicians, it will end up being quite distant from your average inhabitants, and it will also be quite distant from women. So you need to engage and work towards that. So I think I don't have time for more questions, unfortunately, but I will ask you to do the assessment, for the discussions, and there will be my Instagram and my LinkedIn available if you have any questions to reconnect. And thank you very much, and I wish you all the best with your course. So thank you very, very much.